I was raised in the outskirts of a big city in Kentucky. We lived in a less privileged part of town. Being the ninth and youngest kid, our home was always packed. Apart from school, I spent most of my time hanging around the river near our place. I loved checking out how far I could go up the river when I was younger. Me and my friends would always be out there making dams or pretending to be pirates. As I got older, I started to spend more time on sports or at house parties instead of exploring the river. When I started high school, I even got to be the second pitcher for the junior varsity baseball team. I felt like everyone in the team was pretty chill. There were about 5 other newbies like me. We hung out a lot and became close mates. Even now, I remember all the good times we had during practice, chilling in the back of trucks and cracking jokes all night. I clearly remember that part of my life. I can still recall every day all my practices and all my classes. I think I remember it so well because I see it as before. Everything changed when before became during, and then after. After that, everything just got fuzzy. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was a bad time in my life to see whatever it was. We, the freshmen, usually hang out every single day. Every day since school finished, I'd see one of them outside my house, waving at my window, asking me to come out. We'd either practice, ride our bikes to the swimming holes, or grab some fast food burgers. On Friday, we worked on our double plays. I could tell my pitching was getting better. We just finished our practice and were getting ready to leave when someone came up with the idea of camping overnight. I proposed we could go to the beach near my house. So we decided that everyone would go home first and then meet at my place. Everyone came over after a while and we packed our stuff, sleeping bags and food, and headed out. We walked up the river until we reached a big sandy area under an old, unused railroad bridge. I used to camp out there all the time when I was younger. After spending the night messing around and eating a ton of candy, we all curled up in our sleeping bags. It was a super nice summer night. The crickets were chirping. I was totally chilled out and just closed my eyes. I don't know how long I was out when I woke up. It was super dark and quiet. No stars were visible because of the clouds. For whatever reason, I just couldn't figure out where I was on the beach. I checked both sides but didn't see any of my friends. I woke up and checked around. I was fumbling in the sand for my headlamp but couldn't locate it. It was so dark and it was honestly freaking me out. I was starting to worry that I might have left it behind. I was super pumped to come here, but now I realize it was a stupid decision. I was regretting it when I heard something across the river, footsteps and cracking branches in the trees. I heard something big walking through the grass and I stopped dead. I quit trying to find my flashlight and all I could focus on was whatever was making that noise across the river. Then it went into the water. It just jumped right into the river. Then it started moving towards the beach, towards where we were. I was so scared I couldn't breathe. I couldn't call or signal my friends. I was just stuck waiting to see what was going to happen next. Someone walked up to the beach from the water, I'd say about 10 feet from me. I could hear their steps in the sand. I was so shocked I couldn't move. I realized I couldn't feel my left leg. Oh, and my headlamp was in my sleeping bag, basically sitting on it. I thought it was just a rock. Quietly, I moved my leg a bit so I could get the headlamp in my hand. Whatever was in the water didn't make a sound after that. I braced myself, trying to muster up some bravery. I straightened up, turned on my flashlight, and looked into the dark. The creature looked like a tall, strong man covered in hair and walking on 2 legs. It had massive arms and was way taller than your average guy, maybe over 7 feet. I slowly pointed my flashlight to its face. It had a face like a goat. It's breathing hard and staring at me. Then it started coming at us. I yelled. I freaked out and woke up my friends. They quickly woke up and looked where I was pointing, but whatever was there, it's gone now. We didn't even hear it leave. We quietly went back to my place and everyone left on their bikes. They started avoiding me after that. I gave up on practicing baseball and didn't even try for the team next spring. Chatting with those guys became tough. All I could think of was that incident. I'm reaching out to understand better what I've seen, and maybe have a chat with people who've been through the same. Looking forward to your response. My grandpa always said that the old ways are sometimes the best. He would probably call me stupid for even reaching out to your channel about his story. But after tuning in for a while, I think it's not much of a wild story after all. I'll let you be the judge. So right now I live in Pennsylvania, but my folks are originally from the deep south. My grandma used to be a school teacher and my granddad was a policeman. Back then, they had inmates working as laborers, so my granddad had to oversee chain gangs. So, prisoners had to do manual labor like cleaning up roads, building stuff, or digging ditches. My grandpop used to be a sheriff who supervised these guys, which pretty much involved standing out in the heat all day and keeping an eye on everyone. Even though he was strict, he wasn't the kind of guard who let anyone get hurt, no matter if they were an inmate or a fellow guard. He made it a point that the guys had enough water and rest when they needed it, but most of his job was to make sure no one tried to escape and that the work was completed. So this is about something that happened in the summer of '58. There was this group of prisoners who had to clean out some drains by the roadside near Guntersville. That's a cool place, southeast of Huntsville by a lake. Look, clearing drains is tough, but someone's got to do it. Nobody enjoyed it. The labor was pretty tough, especially in the heat, and the mosquitoes were enormous. We were trudging through swampy water trying to remove marsh plants and trash. Trust me, those plants were not easy to uproot, so you can guess there was a lot of grumbling. According to Grandpop, many of the guys just muttered their complaints quietly, mainly because some of the guards didn't like too much talking. Grandpop stayed out of it mostly and just did his job, pacing back and forth along the prisoners as they worked by the road. You know, earlier I told you Grandpop had a German shepherd named Arizona, right? And this dog? He was hardcore, as serious about his job as Grandpop. So when they were on duty and Arizona perked up, like when a dog lifts its head and its ears stand straight, Grandpop paid attention right away. So about 30 seconds later, my grandpa said that one of those criminals began hitting the water where he was standing. It was up to his waist and full of tall weeds. The water was pretty muddy because they were churning it up. You couldn't see anything. But man, he was yelling and making quite a racket about something biting him in the water. So a drainage ditch isn't quite a lake, but it's still full of water, so it's not surprising that there could be something else in there besides people. My granddad would probably have told the guy to shut up, but he didn't because of how Arizona was acting. He called out to a nearby guard to give him a hand, and they pulled the guy out of the water. You can't really move a guy on a work crew without moving the rest of them, but they managed to pull him out enough to see what was going on. Sure enough, he had holes in his jumpsuit. When they pulled up his pant legs, they saw a bunch of bumps, like something bit him. Grandpa said they thought it might be leeches because that's possible, right? But while they were sorting that out, another guy started freaking out and shouting. There's always a chance that the prisoners were just trying to trick the guards and run away. But Grandpa glanced at his dog again, and Arizona was staring and whining at the water in the ditch. He told them to get every guy out of that horrible ditch. Some of the other guards didn't agree, but Grandpop was adamant. It made a difference that the other dog there was acting weird too. Keep looking at the water and whimpering, ears down like it was frightened. When they dragged up the line, the other prisoner was also yelling and his clothes were ripped. But there was something different about him. You know how Grandpop tells it. He said the guy's legs were covered in these tiny white things, looked just like leeches to him. So, you're saying leeches had arms and legs? I remember I stopped you right then to double check. I was curious about how they looked. You quietly said they had these thin, stick-like arms, almost like small tree branches. Their hands and feet had 3 fingers each, and they were dug deep into the man's skin, just like stubborn burrs. The prisoner started shouting like crazy when he saw those creatures or whatever. He tried to escape, but remember, they were all chained together. So naturally, he ends up pulling the guys closest to him onto the ground. Half of them managed to stay as far away as the chains would let them. The others, especially the ones near the lakeside of the road, were all lying down in the dirt and weeds next to the road. The guards attempted to pry the things off his legs, but it was tough because they were slippery and gross, so no one truly wanted to touch them. Even the dogs seemed scared rather than their usual brave selves. They could have just shoved everyone into the bus and headed back to jail for medical care, but these things were really weird. They had something off about them. My grandpa told me that the sheriff tried to remove the biggest leech, but it only clung on tighter. The criminal's leg was bleeding as he cried out. He was a big and tough guy. One of the guards mentioned we should cut off his head, like we do with a lamprey. Did it work? I asked. I could tell from my grandpa's expression he already had the answer. He said, "We chopped it right at the neck, the body was separate, but the head, it stayed stuck. It even went deeper into the muscle." I've got to admit, this story was really grossing me out, but I was hooked. I couldn't stop until I knew what happened next. So what's the story? We torched them. Seems like one of the cops thought of using the cig lighter from the car to get rid of them. My granddad said they used the hot thing on the biggest leech's head to, you know what I mean. I believe they just wanted to make it release its grip. And it did the trick. The leech let go with its mouth wide open, as if it was yelling. It had a head that looked like a lamprey eel, full of teeth and bloody, with small black eyes and no nose. When it was out, Grandpa grabbed it, twisted it off, threw it to the ground, and squashed it with his heavy boot. The sheriff asked him to continue doing so as they freed the clean prisoners and led them back to the bus. Grandpa was left with the icky task of getting rid of these weird things. That's when he had an idea. He rushed back to his car to grab a box of shotgun shells, some of which were already used. He stuffed them in his pocket and went back to the guy they caught. After getting another one of those weird bug things off of him, he put it in the shell box and locked it in the car's glove compartment. When he returned, his fellow cops were picking off the last of those bugs from the prisoner. Just as they were dealing with the final ones, the dogs started freaking out. Grandpa had a lot of faith in his dog, Arizona, so when she stared at the lake past the canal, he did the same. But he couldn't see anything, so he just went back to dealing with the pests. Still, Arizona seemed restless, and she was pacing by the canal, so Grandpa checked again. Turns out there was something in the water. He saw something under the water. It seemed big and looked like it was coming their way. Quickly, my grandpa yelled at everyone to step back from the ditch. That's when another dog started making noises, turning into loud barks. The prisoners tried their best to move out of the water's way, but they were all chained by their ankles, so it was tough for them to move fast. Grandpa then told me about how the water violently burst at the spot where the lake met the drainage ditch. He said it suddenly popped up as if someone had switched on a tap, but what came out was definitely not something natural. He first thought it was an alligator. It's unusual because they don't live here, but maybe one had traveled up the river from the swamp and stuck around. But alligators don't stand up, so this thing, it had skin like a gator, all scaly, green, and slippery, kind of like armor, but also like a gator's belly. But it had arms and shoulders like a human. Weird, though, if a man could look like that. But let me tell you, the worst part was its head. It had teeth like an eel and a wide mouth, black eyes, and no nose. When it screamed, it freaked you right out. My granddad was a tough guy, even in his old age. But when he'd tell me about that shriek, he'd turn as pale as a sheet, saying it was like it came straight from hell. Before anyone else could react or even utter a prayer, it went straight for the nearest criminal. It was the other guy with bites, but not the leech kind. Arizona and the other dog attacked it, grabbing its arm and leg like they were trained. The prisoner was yelling out in pain because it had dug its claws into him. My grandpa told me that the smell of blood was stronger than the foul smell of the swamp water. He quickly pulled out his shotgun and shot right in the middle. He was sure he hit it because the creature stumbled and let out another scream. It stumbled. It didn't stop, though. It totally tore that prisoner's leg up to the bone. At that point, most of the other cops were pulling the dogs off and shooting at it. It went back into the water, left a dying guy and a bunch of confused prisoners and cops behind. They had no clue what had just gone down. So you want to know what happened next? Well, according to my granddad, they did their best to help the guy who got hurt, but he didn't survive. He was dead before they could even move him. The rest of the group were taken back to jail. So you've got to understand, this was in the 50s and everyone talked about two things. When they returned to the jail, the sheriff let the FBI know they got a tip. The suspect was either a communist or an alien. Whatever it wasn't for the local guys to deal with. My granddad would joke that the feds were always late and lacked resources, yet soon enough the guys in suits showed up at the jail, questioning everyone hard. They took away the prisoner's body. They said they needed evidence but didn't say what for. All the witnesses were told to keep quiet, then the federal agents just vanished. There was a news update that night telling folks to avoid the lake because of a dangerous alligator. I asked my granddad why he was only telling me this now. He just laughed. Would anyone even trust me? Then it hit me. He put one of those parasite things in his car, right? But my grandpa denied it. Said he also thought about that after the cops left. But the box with it was missing when he checked his car. There's no evidence or tail. But it seems the authorities took care of the situation at the lake because after that, only one fisher disappeared in an unexplained way. So, was it just some wild tale from a confused old guy, or was it actual fact? I'm not sure what you or your audience think, but I feel better believing the first one. All I know is, I always avoid that part of Lake Guntersville just for my own peace of mind. I took up zookeeping for a strange reason, I suppose. When people eventually ask me why over dinner, I wish I could tell them it was a step towards becoming a vet or a conservationist. But I just tell them it's because of a dream I once had. Once when I was just a kid, I had this weird dream. Some animal that looked like a mix of a dog and a human was knocking on my window. I didn't know what it was, and I can't tell you its name, but it felt familiar, like we were somehow connected. Sounds strange, huh? So that's the reason I chose to be a zookeeper. I kind of feel a connection with animals and wildlife, like I really belong with them. Working at the zoo definitely saved me some money compared to vet school. Most of the time when I tell this story, people ask me if I'm hoping to see that peculiar animal again, as if I'm looking for my best buddy. But honestly, no. I know it was just a dream, but it doesn't mean I haven't seen weird stuff at work. I work at the zoo in New Mexico. We aren't open on government holidays, but we still have to look after the animals. I was working on a holiday once, feeding and caring for the animals as part of a team. Everything was cool until the afternoon. You won't believe it. I saw this really weird thing in broad daylight. Makes it more creepy, right? So the birds in their cages started freaking out. They were squawking and making a ton of noise. Since I was the closest to the area, I was the first one to reach there. I thought maybe there was some kind of fight going on in the exhibits. So it wasn't something inside the cages that freaked out the birds. It was something outside. It was sitting on all fours like a dog or wolf. I thought maybe one of our dogs had somehow gotten out, but the bright afternoon light showed me that wasn't the case. This thing was nearly bald, with just some rough hair on its shoulders and back legs. It had a row of sharp spikes instead of hair on its back. When I started walking, it stopped watching the birds and looked at me. Its snout was long, kind of like a dog's, but its teeth were sticking out. It looked like it was always grimacing. It looked at me with red eyes glowing in the sunlight. I stepped back. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't get a friendly vibe from this thing. I didn't feel safe. I felt scared. I wished I was inside the bird cages. Yeah, I'd probably be making noise like them, but at least there'd be something separating me and this thing. The animal had really long claws that scratched the gravel when it moved towards me. Its back had these spikes that were like vibrating, as if it was trying to sense what I would do next. And it was right. I ran, and I could hear it running on the sidewalk right behind me. I thought about its claws and teeth tearing through me instead of the ground. I can't let that happen. So I shouted for help, hoping more people would come and scare it away. I was glad someone else was around. I dashed over to another zookeeper who started right away asking what was up and what I was running from. I was shocked that they didn't spot it. And yup, when I looked back, the animal had vanished. So I tried to tell the story and they just said I was spacing out. I totally set myself up there, didn't I? Next time during dinner chat, I'll think of a different approach. We looked around the birdcage and found some hints that the creature was there. You could barely see the claw marks on the path, but I knew what they were. When we reported the incident, I was caught off guard that it wasn't just animal control showing up at the zoo. The state police came too. Maybe that odd dog was some sort of criminal, who knows? What I do know is that the questions they asked were pretty weird. Plus, it felt like they didn't believe a word I said. Like, they'd already ruled me out before I even started my story. They were like, okay, we get that you think you saw something. I tried explaining and even showed them the signs on the ground, but it was useless. It's as if they showed up just to make me doubt myself. They made me feel like I was imagining things, even though I was sure about what I saw. I'm not trying to start any rumors, but it seemed like they'd done this before. It felt like they've done this previously. When I attempted to challenge their cockiness, they threatened to lock me up, saying I was causing trouble. I think they were just showing off their power. They finally left, and that beast never came back. We got lucky, I suppose. Especially me, since I didn't want to leave my job. I really love working with the animals. They still seem familiar, even if the things that show up in my dreams and scare me are not as nice as they used to be. So I gotta tell you about this one time at work. You see, I'm a plumber, been at it for a few years. I've seen quite a few rats in pipes, even a snake or two. But this one call out, man, I'll never forget it. Definitely. It was a typical Tuesday in late July. Nothing special. It was hot, but my truck's air conditioning made it bearable. I got a call from an older lady around 2:30 p.m. She was really worked up. She had some kind of plumbing problem, but she couldn't really explain what was wrong. Sometimes older folks can act odd about stuff. They often stress over small things like it's a big deal. I didn't really pay attention to it back then. I noted her address and said I'd swing by after I was done with my ongoing job. She lived in this old-timey house like something you'd see in the countryside of Europe. Right when I entered, I was hit with a strong, strange smell. It was new to me, kind of like a blend of chemicals and something natural. The stink wasn't just your typical plumbing odor. I tried to ignore it and went to the bathroom. When I bent down to check the pipes under the sink, I heard a weird noise, sort of like a whimper or a growl, but oddly, it sounded kind of human. I just ignored it, thinking the noise was just from the old pipes and maybe I was overthinking. I decided to clean out the pipes to check if they were blocked. As I was doing that, I saw something weird. I noticed a reflection of a moving shadow on the shiny copper pipe, and it was behind me. I spun around fast, but saw nothing. I tried to ignore it, move on, but couldn't. I began looking around the house to see what the issue was, checking the walls for any leaks or signs of dampness. I was sure I saw something move from the corner of my eye. Once more, I saw what seemed like the back of a coat disappear around a corner. I thought it was the lady who lived there, so I called out, "Hey, is that you?" But she didn't answer. I felt odd. Suddenly it was cold, and I could almost taste something like iron. I walked to the kitchen, then a gust of really cold wind almost tipped me over. It felt as if something had zoomed right past me. The kitchen was pretty dim, weird for a bright afternoon. But it was weird because everything was super tidy, like too tidy. I got this creepy feeling like someone was watching me, but I told myself it was all in my head, just the strange quirks of an old house. I didn't see any issues with the lady's pipes. I tried to tell her this before I left, but she didn't answer. Where did she disappear to? I heard a noise while I was packing up my tools. I heard a whisper that sounded a lot like my name. I checked around and even went outside to see if it was someone from the street, but there was no one there. Yet I was sure that I heard someone whisper my name. Then it hit me that the whisper wasn't coming from the house. It felt like it was in my head. I was nervous, ain't gonna lie, but I told the homeowner about what I'd been through when she finally tracked me down. She didn't react the way I thought she would, though. After hearing what I said, she went quiet and then asked if I could come back later that evening. She said she wanted me to meet someone who knew a lot about the house's past. I'm not sure why, but I said I'd come back later. Not sure for what, though. When I got back to the house that night, there was a different car parked out front. The house looked really old and run down, like something from the 70s. As I got closer, I could smell this really strong, gross scent, like sulfur and burned meat. I was a bit nervous, but I knocked on the door anyway. The woman who opened the door was wearing this fancy velvet cloak, and her eyes looked really old, as if she'd been around for hundreds of years. She said her name was Annabelle, and that she was a local historian who also worked as a medium. When she noticed my frightened and puzzled face, she smiled at me and invited me inside. We met up in same kitchen where I first felt that freezing wind. That room was still really cold, even colder than the rest of the rooms in the house. All of a sudden, the flower wallpaper, the fancy china, and shiny silverware felt a bit creepy. The medium put an antique book on the table, and I could tell the owner looked worried. She started talking about how the house, built way back in the late 1800s, had a history of scary supernatural stuff. Apparently, the owners back in the early 1900s said they were haunted by something really nasty, shaped like a twisted human but with big black wings. They said it was as high as the room and really muscular, with some sort of gray, metal-like skin. They said its eyes sort of lit up like they were on fire. The next part really scared me. The medium began talking in languages I can't explain. The room got completely silent. Then she looked at me, and her eyes were totally black. Then I heard something right behind me. It was super close, like the whisper was going directly into my heart. A deep voice said my name. I was totally freaked out and couldn't believe what was happening. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't normal. After that weird, creepy meeting, we were told that this thing probably approached us because it wanted something. The medium did not clarify what that something could be, and that left us hanging. The woman's house seemed to be haunted. Weird noises came from the plumbing, and the water sometimes turned red. Even with all my checks, I found nothing wrong. She called me back at night along with a medium, hoping that whatever was causing trouble would reveal itself. She was hoping we'd tell her that the problem was just in her mind, but we couldn't. That was the only job we couldn't solve. Even now, while I'm working on easier plumbing jobs, I still think about that one. Anyone who's worked in trades probably had to deal with some nutty homeowners or crazy jobs, but I bet not many of them have run into something like this. I really loved staying in this cool cabin in Michigan on my last holiday. I was looking forward to it for some time. The cabin was awesome, right between huge pines, and with a great view of a lake next door. It was a great spot if you're into being in the middle of nowhere. So I went there. I'd heard some stuff about this place, like it having loads of places to hike and fish. But there was this one weird thing. There was this local tale about some monster called the Dog Man supposedly living around. I've never been one for believing in this kind of stuff, and to tell you the truth, I thought it sounded kind of silly. So, yeah, imagine this. The day I got there, it just felt so weirdly quiet in the woods. But you know what's funny? Woods never get truly quiet when you really pay attention. You know, you'll hear birds, squirrels, chipmunks, and others running around. If the forest goes quiet, something's up, because it might mean there's some kind of a predator around. Problem is, a lot of these small animals see us humans as the predators. The animals here aren't like city animals who approach you for food. These are wild and see you as a threat, running away when they see or smell humans. So it didn't shock me when all the wildlife scattered as soon as I arrived at the remote cabin. I arrived and slowly unpacked, checking out the place. There was a lot of greenery beyond the cabin. I followed some old trails into the forest and found a small stream bubbling up from the ground. I spent the first day hiking around but didn't see anything unusual. The forest was pretty silent, probably because the critters weren't used to me. That night I picked up on this really stinky smell near the cabin. At first I thought it was just normal wilderness smells, like a skunk or maybe something rotting out in the trees. But this smell was weird, not like the usual. The smell was really strange and gross, like nothing I've ever smelled before. I tried to ignore it. I lit a fire in the wood stove, hoping the smell of the smoke would cover up the weird smell. It helped a bit, but the smell was still there when all was said and done. The weird smell stayed for a few days. What's more weird, since I got here, I haven't seen any wild animals. No squirrels, no birds, nothing. That felt weird, and honestly, it worried me. I was even thinking about shortening my trip. I just had this nagging feeling that something was off. I knew something was up later that night when I was going to bed. Suddenly, I heard a loud howl outside my cabin. It didn't sound like a coyote or a wolf at all. The sound was deeper and kind of sad. I ran to the window but could only see the dark forest. The following day, I went into town to talk with a few locals. I sat in the only bar and grill there and found some folks to chat with during their lunch hour. I brought up the weird odor around the cabin, noticed there weren't many animals around, and also mentioned a strange, deep howling sound. People said wolves weren't usually around here, but it felt like they were hiding something. So I went back to the cabin even more confused. I planned to ask the guy who rented me the cabin about it later that night. That guy, Mr. Todd, he stays just a couple of blocks away. When I first met him, I found him a bit weird. I don't think he's too popular in the neighborhood. I dropped by around evening, not knowing if he worked during the day or not. When I drove in, he was on his porch but didn't seem to see me. He was standing there, just staring at the forest as if something had caught his attention. When I got to him, I saw that he looked kind of weird. He seemed different from the last time I saw him. He was a lot more muscular and his back looked bigger. It was as if he was all hunched over. Then he sniffed the air kind of like a dog does before he turned to face me. His eyes didn't look like his own. They were a weird gold color. They reminded me of a wolf's eyes. He looked totally wild. It took him a second to recognize me, as if he was snapping out of a daydream or something. His eyes went brown again and he yelled at me. He said to leave. Leave right now. Wait until morning before you come back. I didn't really understand what was happening, but I quickly hopped in my truck and sped off. I stayed locked inside the cabin that night. I could hear the creatures howl, but it didn't come close to the cabin. I was really thinking hard. Could Mr. Todd be? No, that can't be. I can't even jot down my thoughts. This is unbelievable. I bumped into Mr. Todd again when I was giving back the keys to the cabin. It seemed like a regular day. We didn't even mention the night I dropped by when he had those yellow eyes. I still find it hard to believe my own story about Mr. Todd isn't really human. Thinking that there might be more like him weirds me out.